Welcome to Universal Theory, where the goal is to find a common language between the abstract and concrete. We are the unorthodox representation of physics and metaphysics. During the time that we have with you, we will discuss all that is potential and equally possible. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Trent.
And together, we are Universal Theory. We welcome you on this journey of scientific and metaphysical exploration, and we hope that any information that is conveyed or professed by either of us is of the utmost importance, value, and of practical use in your everyday lives.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Universal Theory. I'm your co-host, Trent. Join with me, as always, Jordan, flexing the merch. How you doing?
Amazing.
Amazing? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same here. It's been a great day. Universal Theory. Take that peace sign. That's going to be the new thing. When you see people out, you hit them with the U and see if they respond. It'll start a trend. Mm-hmm. And at the very minimum, they think you're saying peace. You know what I mean? So, and then if you got the merch, you can hit them with the arm sidebar. Mm-hmm. They got the link tree on here, so you can be out there representing with your lightsaber. Yeah, it's gonna be a crazy one today, y'all. Mm-hmm. I'm on one today. I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm. Trent's laws in effect. So.
Yeah, and I'm gonna hurt somebody's feelings, and I'm not playing with y'all. I think I'm playing with y'all. Grab you. No, I love y'all. But there's some people. So. Anyways, Season 1, Episode 3, Correspondence. Mm-hmm. As above, so below. As within, so without. We see it on the movie screens. Mm-hmm. We see it in Twitter. We see it on TikTok. We see this is one of those principles that we see everywhere now. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think there's a movie called As Above, So Below. Yeah. It's like a horror movie. But it's out there, and we're going to be talking about, as we do, left brain, right brain, and we're going to get into how correspondence has been a tool that we've used forever, and we're going to get into how it's something that's going to help us moving forward in the future, and we might even get into some examples about where they might have made some mistakes in the past using the equal in nature but different in degree, and not understanding the nature. Right? So when we talk about correspondence, we're talking about equal in nature, different in degree. You have to understand the nature of something before you can understand the difference in degree. Mm-hmm. Right now, what is the main thing that we've been trying to do in physics? The main thing we've been trying to do in physics is unify gravity with special relativity, with a quantum particle called the graviton that we cannot find but is theorized. Mm-hmm. Well, we still haven't found it, sorry. But, right? Yeah, that would be bigger on the news channel than anything if we could do that. And what is that? We are trying to correspond the different laws of physics, the different forces of physics. That is what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. So to my academia people, you know what I'm talking about. This is what we're trying to do. We've been trying to solidify these two things for decades, searching, spending millions of dollars. And the essence of what that is correspondence. How do we correspond general relativity to special relativity? Because they don't talk right now. So when you're thinking about this law and you're thinking about where do I use it? Is it really used? You know, we've made mistakes in the past trying to say, well, planets orbit around the sun, therefore electrons orbit around the neutron the nucleus. Well, but that got us far enough. So it's fine that we made that and then we adjusted. right? We corresponded gravity as a constant force. But it's not. When you get further away, gravity is a gradient. But when you use the word relative, you're saying something corresponds to this in a relative nature. It's never in an absolute, and that's where people can get trapped. There are going to be very few ways that you can use correspondence in an absolute sense other than equal in nature, different in degree. That whole equal in nature, different in degree is saying relative. That's the meaning behind that.
Exactly.
So when we're thinking about relativity in physics, all we're thinking about is how things correspond. What's your take on that?
Going back to what you said about the language, for example, it's like they could be speaking the same language. We just don't know how they communicate. So the question is, we see the differences of gravity, but we don't understand the nature of gravity.
Right.
And that's the problem. So with modern physics, once again, more left brain oriented thinkers, they're inducing from a part. And we started from classical physics versus quantum mechanics, etc. So that is a problem within itself, even though it's necessarily required. Because if we would have hypothetically started with quantum mechanics, we might have figured out what gravity was before we knew what it was from a classical standpoint.
But would we have ever have gotten to quantum mechanics without first developing that rigorous classical
and
theory?
That's the point. What I'm saying is it was necessarily developed from that inductive standpoint.
Yes.
But the point is, we reasoned from the difference in degree back to the nature versus the nature into the difference.
Yeah.
So now the perplexing thing about corresponding these two fields is discovering the nature of gravity. What is the nature of gravity? And I think once we figure out what the nature is, just like anything else in correspondence, then we can truly understand gravity and anything else for that matter. We understand how particles come into being because we understand the nature of particles now, which is the fields.
Yep.
And because of that, we can distinguish the differences in degree.
Yep.
So it's a matter of being able to understand, like he said, understand the nature, then the degree, or understanding the degree, then the nature. Because it's not like you have to reason from one to the other. You can do both because our intelligence is built to do both.
Yeah, our language is. Like religion, right? We use a word that says religion, and then in that category, there's subcategories, right? And those subcategories correspond to each other. So you can think of it as a tree branching out. You can think of it as a hand, right? The wave is like a fist. And then as it comes through, it sticks out. Imagine that fist has 3 fingers now. There's an illusion of separation, even though at the root it's one. And then you can imagine if my fingers could extend even further and split even further, then that is those waves going from the energy into different waves, and then those waves splitting into different particles. So there is this mindset with correspondence that if you understand the root or the nature, then you're going to be able to understand how things are different in degree.
Yep, and then vice versa. And going back to the concept about religion meaning to tie back to. What are we tying it back to? We're tying it back to the nature.
Yeah, people like to say the essence, but when they say the essence, they mean the nature.
Exactly.
That's what they mean.
Because that's what the nature is. That's what the nature of this podcast is dealing with correspondence. Corresponding the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere corresponding, which is symbolic to the circle and the dot, or religion and science, etc. We are making a correspondence. We are establishing a correlation. We are building a language to transcend the barrier of our ignorance.
Yep.
because we've isolated ourselves and we've limited ourselves to specific fractalized aspects of intelligence and expressions of life. So back like to what you were saying about the fist going in and then breaking off into 3, and then 3 becomes 6 and 6 becomes 9, or 9 becomes 18, however you want to look at it. It's life does the same thing. It becomes more fractalized and broken down. But, let's get back to corresponding with the language. If I'm using fractals as a way to describe nature, is it an exact fractal or is it a natural relativistic fractal?
Yeah.
And that goes back to the definition, because the words correspond to specific definitions, which correspond to the individuals who develop those words and those terms and those phrases and those corresponding definitions. And now we cannot erroneously apply them to other concepts, but we can make correlations. And we can say, okay, well, there's more than one type of fractal. In fact, the nature of a fractal is not exact.
Right.
So when we came up with mathematical exact fractals, that was a fractionalization. It was a fractalization. We broke it down to where we can conceptualize it in specific ways. So we fractalized.
Yep. Yeah, and if you want to understand what we're talking about as mathematical fractures, I'm going to have up the Mandelbrot set. So the Mandelbrot set is something that is a mathematical fracture. When you zoom in to different parts of this graphical representation of that equation, you see the exact same thing. But that's in math. That's not what you see in real life, because real life, the goal is correcting to get to that mathematical fraction, right? The essence of what everything is when it's in a superposition. That's when it is in its truest form.
Yes.
In the superposition, when it is represented in every possible way. And then, boom, it collapses to where you are right now, and you are just one of those. You are one of many attempting to course correct to the nature of it. And so are all the other versions of you, all the other universes out there. But you'll never quite get there, because in order to be there, you have to be all of it.
And in essence, all of them are in a superposition, because they are all the possible permutations that could happen.
Yeah.
So someone could look at it and say, well, technically I am. That's why there is no course correction from an absolute standpoint, but there is course correction from a relative standpoint, which goes back to the law of correspondence. By nature, everything is equal. But the degree is the infinite fractalization of everything once it collapses from the superposition. But then even to the superposition, everything has already happened. And in fact, never happened, because happening implies that something transpired.
Yeah.
So to it always was. And that goes back to us talking about the all is mind. And this mind has a nature and then a fractalized difference in expression or degree.
Yep.
So it's always going to go back to that. And then back to what he was saying about the superposition. This is for you, too. Back to the superposition. It is perfectly symmetrical. But you cannot find anything that's perfectly symmetrical in nature.
Right.
And the reason why is because everything is different in degree, which means it's asymmetrical, which means that if something is symmetrical and something is asymmetrical, they equal perfect symmetry.
Yeah.
But from the standpoint of the wave collapsing and becoming asymmetrical, where all the pieces are asymmetrically inclined to each other, you have friction, which allows for evolution. It allows for inertia. It allows for transition and mutation. So without that, we would never have the perspective of establishing correspondences.
Right.
Because everything would correspond so perfectly in a superposition that there would be nothing to experience.
Yeah.
So the nature of existence is to experience itself. You talked about this before in a previous episode. That's
Yep.
why y'all have to go back and watch the episodes.
Yeah, check it out. It'll be right here.
So he talked about that, the nature of existence, equal in nature, different in degree, is to experience itself. Well, it can't experience itself if it's not fractalizing into all of these infinite different permutations.
Yep. Yeah. It's like Jordan said, that is the nature of what's happening. And just thinking about the modern world, we couldn't do this podcast 30 years ago. To all the haters out there, listen to me, because think about who you're going to correspond to in history. The person who says that this isn't happening, or the person that understands that it is. Because like I just said, 30 years ago, this couldn't happen. The data is showing that religion and philosophy and science is coming to a head. That's what Jordan and I are showing you. So understand that this isn't something that is just coming out of nowhere. In a sense, it did, but now we're down the road. It is obvious the trend. It is obvious with quantum mechanics and where the math is telling us. And before, it was like the kooks, and there was a few people in physics that were theoretical physics that believed these things, and now it's everywhere. And it's not just hype, it is these things are actually coming together. So if you're having any doubt in your mind, that's why we're putting the research papers down below. That's why we are talking about data. Jordan and I talked, and there's so many things that we hypothesize that we don't bring up in this podcast, but we will in lives and we will in the Patreon, because this is meant to be data-driven, spiritually data-driven and physically data-driven. We are trying to literally connect the left and the right brain with this podcast. And correspondence is just the best kind of principle to talk about it, because it's what we're doing. We are corresponding these things. We are the correspondence of it.
Exactly. So, correspondence, as above, so below. As above in the wave, as it is in the expression of the wave or the particle. As it is in the circle, as it is in the dot. And these two are a singularity. So it's not like things don't correspond because they're in a singularity. They do correspond because they are in a singularity. It's a perfect correspondence, but the nature of it is different. The nature of it is the same, but the degree is different. So understanding this principle allows for you to think paradoxically. You're thinking paradoxically when you utilize this principle, because it's a rule that allows you to reason with other things, to connect things that would be impossible to make connections with.
Yes.
So when we talk about, like in metaphysics, they have the celestial planes, and they say that the thought of creation existed in the mind of the creator, and everything that happens in the highest world happens in every other world, equal in nature, different in degree, until it expresses itself in the physical world. So even if we don't have tools to discover these realms, or we are the tools, but we may not have technological tools to discover these worlds, we are incrementally coming up with these technological tools to validate these different spaces.
Yes.
To see whether or not they actually exist. Now, I'm not saying they don't, because like he said, we can postulate and speculate on the nature of existence and not have the data, and we'll express that, in the Patreon, etc. But right now, it's just about the data. It's not that we don't subscribe to some of these other notions. It's just the fact that, and we've had the experiences. It's just the fact that this podcast is specifically for the data, because, the nature of it, the nature of metaphysics, we're in tune with that. So we'll express it on other platforms, but this degree specifically deals with data.
Yeah.
And I was having a conversation with one of my friends, and I know he's going to be watching this. So we were talking about the nature of mind and whether or not mind is a universal concept.
Oh,
and
right.
it can be applied to everything.
Yeah.
So equal in nature, different in degree. We're going to get into it. So, you like data. So here we go. So there's a guy, I think his name is, and we're going to put the link
Yeah.
down below, but I think his name's Michael Levin. And he deals with biology, and he's dealing with morphology and bioelectrical fields, etc. Okay, and he was talking about the nature of mind without utilizing this principle. But he said he's developing this model which is called TAME. It's technological approaches to mind everywhere. So, and he was talking about planaria. And you take one planarian or a group of planaria and you put them in barium chloride, and it is a non-specific potassium channel blocker. And if the planaria, once you put them in this barium serum, you can't. I mean, once you put them in there, they can't survive. Overnight, their heads will explode.
Right.
And then he said, but if you leave them in there for a few weeks, their heads, they'll grow new heads. And then they don't replicate that fast. So he's like, well, how is this possible?
Yeah.
And it's because they're regulating their transcription factors. They're altering how their genes produce proteins to reproduce new heads in a novel environment. This is not an environment that they're used to being in. And he was like, they're maneuvering in a transcriptional space. And we are having an IQ test, basically, when we think about other life forms and we limit the amount of intelligence that they might have because we lack the intelligence to understand how they may have mind and interact with their environment. And he talks about the different spaces like transcriptional spaces and morphospace, which is the amount of possible anatomical permutations or correlations that can happen, equal in nature, different in degree. And then he talks about physiological space, 3D space that we maneuver in. And he talked about how, basically everything has intelligence by nature, just different in degree. And they're learning how to understand that because they recognize that they have mind and they recognize that they have intelligence.
Right. Yeah, because if you subscribe to survival of the fittest, then something like this would take a very long time. If their heads are exploding, right, that's how I take it, is then, sooner or later one would come through with a mutation. And generally it would be a pack of them or a group of them that move through a terrain that has some of this serum, right, that causes the heads to explode. So an offspring would come that would allow for them to traverse through that so they could experience more of their environment. But that's not what's happening. I mean, this is happening almost in real time, a couple of weeks.
Yes.
So it's much stronger of an intelligence than survival of the fittest is kind of the big picture of what I feel like you're saying.
Yes.
And
yeah, he's saying they have problem-solving skills.
Yeah.
And he was like, so they can maneuver in transcriptional spaces, morphose spaces, and just like we maneuver in physical space. And then we are, like a Russian doll, we're a collection of individual parts that work together more or less efficiently to produce this macroorganism. But think about all the different spaces that we exist in and how we're, utilizing different forms of intelligence that we may or may not even be aware of.
yeah.
So think about other organisms being able to do the same thing and being able to achieve similar goals by different means, equal in nature, different in degree. Because we like to think that mind, and this, we're not trying to go, back to mentalism. We already did that.
No, but we're tying it in.
Yes, equal in nature, different in degree. All things have mind by nature because mind is a form of intelligence. It's a form of intellectual expression. And we can even go as far as to say emotion because you have emotional intelligence. It's an adaptive mechanism to properly engage the environment for the sake of survival. Because what does every organism seek to do? Survive. So, however, equal in nature, everything seeks to survive. The way we survive is just a difference in degree.
Yep.
And they're using this on a practical scale. This is not just philosophic discussion and
Right.
debate. This is practical, tangible, where they're saying, okay, we can also manipulate bioelectrical fields.
Right.
And we can insert data, basically. We can insert RNA that emits a specific charge of electricity through the ion channels, and we can regulate these ion channels, and we can make these organisms produce organs in different facets and features biologically, because we're controlling the information in the bioelectrical field, which dictates how these cells transcribe proteins and interact with each other.
Yeah, but think about how powerful that is. The fact that our body has this bioelectrical, because we have positive and negative charges, right? We have protons and we have electrons that our body is comprised of. And when you think about the fact that we can start to manipulate that field that our body exists in order to reproduce a limb, if that's not saying the body has some sort of auric properties, I mean, this is not for the mystics out there, the spiritualists. What we're saying might be data driven, but think about the idea, the concept behind what we're saying in these studies. And we're not doing these studies. We're finding these studies. Jordan is looking up stuff, and he's finding these amazing studies that these scholars are performing that are showing that, hey, you're right. So don't get lost in the data. Understand the concepts behind what we're talking about. There is an auric field that is electrically charged because of words, right? We might think of it as two different things, but it's the same. And we're tapping into that intelligence, and we could grow an arm. We could grow a hand outside. We could tell these cells in the middle of our arm to become a little leg. It's like we could. This is like an endless. So then that's like, okay, now we're manipulating the auric field. What kind of consequences could there be to that? How is that going to shape the evolution of the human? How does that correspond to, E equals mc squared? When we think about just tying it all into the energy, when Einstein came up with that, we've always known energy was, kinetic energy was 1/2 mass times the velocity squared. That was the equation. That's how we solved it. And if you look at E equals mc squared, E as in energy, m as in mass, which is the same in kinetic energy, and then v squared, which is velocity squared, he put in c squared, or the speed of light. So now he equated energy with mass, and that had never been done. And I'm sure there were people that didn't understand how that corresponded. But Einstein knew the nature of things. Einstein understood the nature behind what he was studying. So he was able to formulate and formalize these different equations and win Nobel Prizes. And afterwards, it's like people are very deterrent against change, right? They don't want to change. But then once that change happens, they're happy with that change, even though that's what they were just fighting against, right? And then now they're living that. And then when the new change comes in, they're like, no, that's not for me. Even though you're living in the now, which in the past was the change. So if you can remember that, you won't be that person fighting against the change. And we're not saying, hey, you should just believe that you can fly. Because if somebody's showing you how that corresponds, they might be just a little misconstrued and realize that we need to be in an airplane for that, right? Like there is these correlations, but we're not just going to jump out of a window and fly. So I'm not saying to be naive. It's quite the opposite. I'm saying be shrewd and understand the nature of what's happening and just try to formulate the difference in degree. Because energy is energy. And then it becomes a little more complex. And then it becomes a little more complex. And then it becomes a little more complex. And this energy up here, it might be split 100 different ways, zooming around. It's the same as the energy down here that's one block. right? It's the exact same energy, but it looks completely different. To the computer nerds out there, on-premise storage, right, versus cloud storage. They are two different forms of storage. One was old school, and it was everybody had their computer and downloaded their applications, and they were individualized, right? That's how computers grew up, as individuals. And then the internet came around and they started connecting. So they became more intelligent. That form of technology just became more and more intelligent. And now it looks a lot more like a human brain than it does cells, right? Just individual cells or individual computers getting more and more memory and getting stronger and stronger. And now they're connecting. And if you can see how that corresponds to the human body or just to the mind, we are building a silicon mind.
Yeah, and it's a reflection of our mind, and our mind is a reflection of how neurons interact and other organisms, which correspond to how, just like the guy was saying, we've made this argument, but obviously he was making it on a more sophisticated level, just not philosophically or using the principles of physics, but of like biochemistry. And he was talking about how the single cells, amoebas, etc., how they will interact with their environment, morphospace, where he was talking about how they have, you know, these biochemical reactions that transpire that allow for morphology to navigate morphospace and transcriptional space on a genetic scale, etc. And then we have electrochemical reactions, which are evolutionary adaptations, which allow us to navigate our physical 3D space, which corresponds to the organism being able to navigate its corresponding environmental space.
Exactly.
So we are technically, you know, from the superposition to the collapse, from the wave to the particle, from the mind to the universe, which is equal in nature, different in degree, as within, so without. This mind's, the network of this mind is built through the expression of all life, whether it be called inorganic or organic.
Yes.
And this also goes for silicone-based life as well. Computers, robots, etc. Whether it be galaxies swirling around each other and communicating in some form of radiation and gravitational impacts, or the solar systems that exist within the galaxies, or the suns communicating with each other in some way, or the planets, or the organisms on the planets or within the planets. All of this is a network of infinite intelligence. And we can't say otherwise, because as soon as we define something from an evolutionary standpoint, like he said, what is normal used to be abnormal. So what was thought to be abnormal becomes normal as well. So you have to evolve these technological tools, these software, cultural tools impressed upon your hardware to advance the hardware and to shape and modify it on a genomic scale, on a molecular scale, on a cellular scale, etc., to advance the organism, and then the organism develops a greater and greater capacity to comprehend its reality. And that's essentially what all life is doing. All life is operating at different levels of sophistication and complexity to express life and to advance its intellectual capability of engaging the environment for the sake of survival. And they're working together. Even when there's a predator and a prey, they're technically working together, because if you kill off too many of the prey or too many of the predator, you create an imbalance.
Yes.
And we name them predator and prey.
Yes.
Really, it's just a process.
It's just yin and yang.
Exactly.
If you try to imagine a world where there's just half, try to imagine where you just have one half of the equation. And that's kind of how we try to live our lives. Either there's just a divide, and I get it, but it's between academia and mysticism. But that's like looking at a yin and yang poster and saying, yeah, I like the black, but the white, yeah, I could do without, or vice versa. And that's just not, or you're looking at your plate and it's like, I could go without half of this food. let me go ahead and just remove the hydrogen molecules from the oxygen in my water. Good luck drinking that. So we need to really understand that that's all this is. It's two halves, it's two sides. In closing, that's what correspondence is. It is the yin and the yang. And if, like Jordan was saying, the predator and prey, to the outside looking in, it is just a system, right? It is the same energy being transferred, and nothing is created or destroyed, and it's in harmony. There's reciprocity, right? The rabbits don't evolve to run faster if there isn't something chasing them, right? So there's always going to be a reciprocity. The giver's the receiver, and the receiver is the giver.
And if you don't have, for closing thoughts, think about, how they say, I think it's like diversity is the spice of life, something along those lines. And if you don't have diversity, then how could you have ever developed the intelligence to disqualify something else as having the absence of intelligence? Without the diversity and the complexity of life, you would have never developed the intelligence to disqualify another intelligence. So we need diversity. And within that diversity is mind, because technically there is no individual mind. Without diversity, without complexity, without the other half, without this half, there is no the other half. So these two work together reciprocally, symbiotically, as a singular mechanism. And anyone that says that you can go without something, or something doesn't possess intelligence, or it doesn't possess mind, you have to start asking yourself, how far have you delved into this concept? Because just looking at the fact that having something opposing you is providing the necessary pressure and inertia to produce thought within itself. If you didn't have pressure, you wouldn't have thought at all.
These are the things that tie us. These are the things that bind us. It's like an 8th grader saying that a 7th grader isn't cool because they're not in 8th grade. And we're past that. I believe we're all grown now. So next week, we'll be talking about vibration. Make sure you've read about that in the Kybalion. That's the next principle we're going to cover. We love you. Have a good night.
Don't talk to me, it's off to me. Assault police, the artistry's my carpentry. It's carpeting for all of these false MCs. I chalk the scene, I'm Charlie Sheen. I darken dreams, the carpet bleeds. My pauper leaves a scar in your whole face like a Carter scene. I go hard cause the car to me. You ain't hard as he, or the yard hate. Bar hate, it's the Nazarene. Choking line with a main, I'm a martyr king. I'm a god, so it's all with me. Pull at your heart, I'm chewing at your arteries. Damn, for the artistry, the artist bleeds. I'm martyring your darling. It's all with me, get lost at sea. Shout the priest, stomp the beast. I do not play, it's often seen. I'm off the boat, got a blade on me, homie, I'm off the go. I don't know, but you niggas put them off the dose, or off the smoke, a cough, a choke, a puke up a coffin toe, with a whole body in it like a mafia joke. Off the coast like mafios. My posse grows like poppy fields. Got a Glock on my side, but it's not the quote. I got the tree, I got the rope, I got the crown, I got the throne. I'm not the Pope, I am the Lord. Goddamn your soul, the gamut grows, the ganja pose, a cannon show. Loud, I'm a blast like my hand and drone. I control the whole globe with a Thanos glove. Jewels on my wrist from the planet dust. You're messing with a god like I am the code. I am the code, the camera froze, they cannot cope. They plan to post, but I'ma kill them all. With the plan I wrote, the antidote, the man I spoke. I gave him life, but I'ma end them all. I'ma ram and close the brand and palm volcanic rhymes. The man I lie, the fans are spawns. I chant the rhyme, my clan's a god. You cannot stop the Metatron, the messenger. The Messiah, the master of the last of dawns, the mastodon, the razor-tooth dragon that'll blast your pawns and make your king disappear with a magic wand. Be gone. The path them on, get a rapping gauze and rip by claws and smash your skull. Your pass baton, the gap is large. I'm way too far, I'm past the stars. Galactic bars, the acid bars. I rap in fours and tundra sword. The guns on board, Wakanda Lord, the jungle boy. You come some more, come for war. And I made the mongrels mourn. I'm hungry for the lungs of yours. Your tongue's in cold, my stomach roars. I munch on gourds, running force, the hunter's board. Hunt for sport, slap a pole and punch a horse.